Welcome to today's webinar on Docs Design and Data, the Solo Architect's Toolkit. This is Sheba and I'll be your co-host for tonight. Now I'm delighted to introduce our speaker, Saujanya Parthasarathy, technical writer at Funnel, and she was the company's first documentation hire, building Funnel's documentation systems from the ground up. With 11 years of experience across product documentation, content design, and content strategy, she specializes in creating clear user-first content at the intersection of clarity, collaboration, and creativity. Today, she'll explore what it's like to build a documentation function from scratch without the comfort of a CMS or off-the-shelf tooling. From collaborating with an AI team to writing prompts that surface directly in product chat, she'll walk through the systems, experiments, and lessons behind delivering great product content as a team of one. She will also share practical takeaways on working cross-functionally, thinking beyond tools, and growing as a solo contributor in a product-led team. If you have any questions during the webinar, then feel free to drop them in the Q&A box and we'll make sure to address them towards the end of the session. With that, I'll hand it over to Saujanya. The stage is yours.
Thank you, Sheba, and thanks for the Document360 team for giving me this opportunity. Like she introduced me, I'm Saujanya. I'm a technical writer at Funnel, and also the emphasis on I'm the only writer at Funnel so far. In this session, I hope to share my experience of how it was to move from larger enterprises to a scale-up organization, the challenges I dealt with as a technical writer and as a content designer. And in today's scenario, we have two types of audience, like most of us know, humans and the AI. So I'm also going to talk a little bit about what kind of metrics or how can you evaluate your content's performance, and some takeaways that we all can experiment after we finish the session. To set some context, a little bit about myself, I am a technical writer, but I am there everywhere where there's an intersection between user experience and product adoption. And I try to find different ways where I can make it even more easier for customers to start using the product. I've worked for almost 12 years now, and before joining Funnel, I worked in few larger enterprises as well as few startups, and most of my deliverables have always revolved around product documentation and UX copy. But apart from this, something that grabs my attention or I lean towards more is also looking into content governance, looking at patterns in designs where content can be much enhanced or improved. And I also dabbled a little bit in marketing communications, so product marketing and go-to marketing strategies and how content can help products. Another phase is also something that interests me. I love collaborating and I try to find different opportunities with my stakeholders and try to identify what's working with them and how easy and efficient we can work. But apart from that, I also love to inject creativity wherever possible, be it in my professional life or in my personal life. I learned a lot about technical writing at Cisco. The kind of products that I was documenting was data center products, and I also learned about cybersecurity products in the next organization. So something that these organizations taught me, or like the kind of experience I took from me, was about precision and how it's very important, and how even a slight change or like a misplaced word or commas can like lead to larger failures or can cost a lot for the customers and the company. Now, a little bit about Funnel. Funnel is a SaaS company that creates a marketing intelligence product, and I joined Funnel end of 2024. So something that I noticed as soon as I joined a scale-up organization was, in the past, if I could put it in a few words, I felt like I was this specialized cog that belonged to a very well-oiled machine, and everything was already like functioning well, and I didn't have to like change anything too much. Whereas in a scale up, because I was setting up documentation systems from scratch, I felt like I had this machine available, but I had to like create all those specialized paths to make it work more efficiently. So something that you might also see is how the processes are very well defined and structured in larger organizations, which means you may not have to redefine these processes depending on how it was established and then refined. Whereas in a scale up organization, you even if you define processes, you might have to reiterate and improve the process until it reaches that stage where you find it more like, flawless. And another important distinction is in a larger enterprise, you might use dedicated tools for different phases in documentation. I remember using specific tool even for reviews in documentation in the past. Whereas in a scale up organization, you are the one who's going to like set up that foundation, which means you're going to start working with more general tools and try to find out what works well and what is not working well, and how your product is going to scale and how your tools is going to adapt to that content needs. Another distinction is also in larger enterprises, you might have more teams performing a set responsibilities. This could be documentation, operations team, or like editorial teams. Whereas in scale up organizations, something that I've observed is one person taking up different roles and responsibilities, which also means I miss peer reviews a lot, and I don't get to see my content in different perspectives that I got in the previous places. And speaking about teams, which also meant if only technical writers contributed to documentation, even if 10 writers contributed to one document, the customer would see just one voice coming out to them because we had guidelines in place and templates in place. Whereas in a scale up, documentation is going to be more of a crowdsourced knowledge, which means there are going to be inconsistency in voices. And that's something that you're going to notice immediately as soon as you move into scale up. Now that I've showed you a little bit about how these two worlds differ, some of the challenges that I faced as a technical writer was with respect to information, with respect to using the tech stack for documentation, and with respect to how documentation quickly went out of date and I had to update them immediately. First, let's look into the information vacuum. It was important for me to know where I could go look into if I need some information about a product or a feature. Sometimes this lived in different people's head or different internal sources that they might think is not important for a technical writer. And this also means that when sometimes features went live, and I work in an agile setup now, I don't have enough time to compete with the evolution of the product speed. So, to address that, as in the first few months of my time at Funnel, instead of going behind like which article should I update, I started trying to understand the domain more, and which in turn led to like me trying to talk to different teams and try to understand how their responsibilities and life revolved around this product and how the business works altogether. This will also help you with increased visibility, and this is very important because your stakeholders might have or might not have worked with technical writers in the past. And on that note, it's also important for you to identify what is something that you need and what teams that you should be collaborating more frequently with, and understand the kind of communication modes that your stakeholders prefer. This could be as simple as, already preparing a draft and going and meeting them in person and getting the reviews done quickly, or maybe some people prefer having the docs in Notion and then they would leave comments there. Something that you all should not forget is to go through the version history of the product so that you understand the legacy, how it evolved, and what kind of decisions were made in the past. This will also help you not try to test something that already was tested in the past. As a result of all of this, something that came out very useful for me is how the work culture is set in different organizations. This was also a huge difference because previously I worked in India, and Funnel was the first company I started working from in Sweden. So this also gave me insights into how different teams work in different parts of the world. And I also found a channel that was commonly used to talk about documentation updates, where ownership was not really anyone's, did not belong to any team. So I took that as an indication. I took ownership and I created workflows. The workflow is very simple. I asked the stakeholders to point me to the article that I should be updating, what kind of feedback they had about this article, and the reviewers who could help me with the reviews, basically. By doing this, I kind of turned how the random information that came in into more structured information. And right now, we know how important structured information is, or structured data is, with more automations and AI in almost all the processes that we follow. The other challenge that I faced was trying to use the non traditional tech stack for documentation. Right now at Funnel, we are trying to use a system that's not made for documentation, but it gives us just enough features to go live with customer facing documentation, takes care of the SEO at the back end, and the search is okay. But what the kind of issues that we started seeing was reviews were starting to take longer because I had to bring my collaborators out into Notion or Google Docs and then have them leave the comments there, and then I have to copy paste the content into the current system and then publish. And the version history and the diffs are not reliable, so which means I had to use another tool to copy paste and then come back to it for publishing. And this was another issue that I never even thought I would be dealing with, is formatting, because of the to and fro between the tools. To address this issue, we're experimenting with hybrid docs as code workflow. Emphasis on hybrid because we still have a few other stakeholders who are using the current tools to create some other type of customer facing information. So, how I set up this workflow is the structured information that I created in Slack, along with the style guides and templates that I created, goes into AI, which gives me a first draft, or basically automating some amount of the blank page, and I have something to get started with. And this gets loaded in GitHub. All my stakeholders are in GitHub, and even if they are not on GitHub, we all are using Cursor. You can even choose any Markdown editor of your choice, and so the revisions and the merge requests are much more easier in this workflow. And all I have to do is use again another API to push it into Intercom and just publish. And I didn't have to worry too much about formatting because I'm downloading the MCP into my GitHub repository and also pushing it the same way back into Intercom, which means I am not touching too much of formatting. I'm just experimenting with the content chunks that I already have in the articles. Now, coming to the documentation rot process. Like I mentioned previously, I work in an agile setup, and my product is evolving faster than my writing speed. So this solution here would not be to, race against time or find a way to write faster. It would be setting up systems that would help me scale instead. And by the time a team notifies me and like I try to address it, it still the documentation still goes out of date, and it at some point start feeling like I'm just like chasing outdated documentation to update it, only to find it more outdated. So, to address this situation, we are trying to not increase the trust gap, sorry, decrease the trust gap, what I mean here is not waiting for the customers to come to me with feedback, because if that's what I do on the longer run, the customers are already like losing the trust and they don't want to like give me more feedback. So to address all these changes, we're trying to come up with self-healing documentation. What we're trying to do here is try to use a tool that simulate the user actions to test docs. It'll pick up the task-based content that I have, and try to compare it with the workflow in the UI. And if there's an UI change, it'll notify me immediately. Or you can even set up the automation to notify a Slack channel immediately. But I should also emphasize that this will work only for the task based content. We're trying to come up with more automations to test other non task based content as well. So, we saw some of the challenges that I addressed as a technical writer. Now, as a content designer, some of the issues that we saw was all the designers were excited to collaborate with me, but some of the common questions that they had were repetitive. And at some point, it felt like I was becoming the bottleneck. And something that most of us don't realize is how micro decisions is actually costing us more than most of the other strategical or more complex decisions. To address this, we started looking into different places where the users are communicating with our product on screen and try to understand their goal. What are they looking for? If they are looking for just like confidence, or do they want a little nudge more so that they can go and go to the next step and click and go finish up their configurations further. Depending on this analysis, we try to understand how intrusive we should be as a product, whether if we should prompt them with sticky models or if it's just an FYI that they should know so that they can just have a toaster notification. Based on this, we standardized success patterns, which included from design point, they included all the guidelines that's needed. But from content point of view, we standardized what kind of headlines should go, how should the body look, and how should the CTS look, and what kind of terminology was okay and not okay. Another issue that we try to address is the most frequently asked questions was, should I use this title casing? Or if I have a new feature name, and how should I use this? Is this a proper noun or common noun? And how am I supposed to address this in buttons or different other UI components? I created a naming flowchart. The one that you see now is fairly simple, but I have a much more detailed one internally where after the designers answer all of those questions, they definitely get an answer. If not, then that's the very complex situation that we all have to be involved in, but that's going to be very rare. So, as an other dimension to this terminology guide that I was creating for myself, I added more fields that will be useful for other teams as well. In this case, I added design notes and other labels that will be useful for our designers, including forbidden terms and what's okay and what's not okay. As a result of this, we started treating this single source of truth in as an internal API, which we can use it in different ways that we want. Where you want to, if you want to create some customer facing content, and if you want to look at this glossary, then yeah, you can download this MCP and then start using it in the ways that you want to, and it'll give you guidance basically depending on the team that you're from. As a result, earlier we used to look at language or the copy when we would go live or after going live sometimes. But now we are starting building, with verified linguistic identity from scratch so that by the end of it, we don't have to worry too much about if this is the correct way of building a feature or not. We already have designed it the right way. So we saw how when you create content or when you create a piece of document, the challenges that you may see in a scale up. But another important metric is to understand how your content is now performing. And this is another limitation that we have with the current tool. We can't export the metrics like we would, or also we would need larger support teams to, create a specific reporting for just documentation. One portion of it, I addressed it using my product itself. We try to export the metrics and try to create a dashboard and funnel, and we use it. But there are so many other metrics that we look into. For example, we have page views and scroll depth, but that's not enough to see how accurately your content is performing. So that's when I started looking more into how AI can help. We have an internal solution. This uses RAG, where anyone in the company can ask this solution product related questions, and it comes up with responses based on the customer facing knowledge base documentation. And at the back end, it'll have a relevancy score, which is the NDCG score. It's usually between 0 to 1. Depending on the score, I would look at documentation related to it and see if I can improve the score. The system takes close to a day to ingest this changes in the documentation and reflect. And so after 24 hours, I would again go ask the solution the same question to see if the relevancy score has improved or not. So this was one part of how I use the relevancy score to improve documentation. The other aspect to it is sometimes the responses had a great score, but the humans were not finding it relevant. This was because the context was not completely understood by AI. In such instances, we even took the feedback from the users and saw how we could improve the context for documentation and try to see if the quality can be improved that way as well. So another learning here, though we use AI, we do need manual interference to ensure that we have double proofed the quality of the content. And another instance that I used where to measure the quality of the documentation is to see how the docs were performing inside the product. We have an AI product. It's called as Data Chat. So this is an AI conversational interface where customers can talk to their data and ask questions about their data. And one of the resources that this relies on is again the customer facing documentation. So, based on the responses and based on how the conversations went, we also started looking into documentation and try to bring up some best practices. For example, this is a well known one. For example, if you're adding a video, try to add a little bit of text here and there so that it's easier for AI to understand that you're cross referencing it to another text article. Or if you're having screenshots, then add some text about it so that the AI knows it. So basically, AI is not missing the context, and you're trying to improve the context as much as possible. The funny thing is, though this performance or this docs is inside the product as well, the kind of changes that I'm doing to this documentation is as what a technical writer would do. Now, as a content designer, what I looked into was the conversation starters that the product had. Earlier, we did go with one version of the feature where we had lesser categories, and we were trying to understand how the customers were using a product. And also a shout out to my product designer here who is also mentoring me about user centricity in different types of content. So I started learning to use full story and other designer tools to review more user story sessions about how the conversations went for this product. And I looked into the product key search results as well to understand the user journey. As a result of it, I came up with these categories that mimics the customer's journey and how they would be using the product, and came up with different questions under each of these categories as well to see if they can just like start the conversation more fluently and they don't have to hesitate or wonder what should be the starting point of the conversation. And like any other feedback, it just doesn't stop here. We also continuously monitor how these questions are performing and how we can improve the content. So we saw all the challenges and the kind of solutions I used to tackle these challenges. If you wanted a cheat sheet, or if you're someone who is trying to like start up something at a scale up, I would say start building the systems first before you start writing. This will give you a holistic perspective of what your business is doing and how your content will be used and how your stakeholders are going to collaborate with you. And try to automate as much as possible using style guides, templates, terminology guidelines, everything. I think we as technical writers and content designers follow style guides a lot, and that's our advantage. That's our huge advantage. So use these like logic kits to offload as many micro decisions as possible. And I did miss peer reviews, but I'm also trying to use as much as possible, as much as AI as possible, to like try to like get a peer review for me. And this doesn't stop there. I also try to look into how customers are reacting for documentation and try to like come up with as much as automation possible to audit the content that I have. And this would be something that's very difficult when you start learning, you know, a bunch of processes, and when you're with an organization for a longer time, you have a mental model about how the process should function and how your tools should function. But it's very difficult to know that sometimes that these processes are not working for you. If it could be as simple as, okay, if the review is taking longer time, then something is actually not working out. You should go and reinvent the process. And this is also very important for writers at larger enterprises, because, yeah, sometimes, yeah, you are caught up in the loop for a really long time, and it's very difficult to understand that, yes, something is not working. And also, initially, I would wait for teams to let me know when there's a change, but it I realized that it was not doing any good for documentation, or like how I should approach documentation. So I started being more proactive and started looking at the product origin so that I can start documenting from then, or even start understanding what's happening with the feature and be more up to date with what's happening. This is a very, very crucial lesson for me. And also, like I mentioned previously, I work in an agile environment, and it was difficult for me to be okay with just good enough quality. But know that if you're going to be a single writer for a while, and if you're going to be the one who's going to set up systems, this is going to exhaust you in the longer run. So try to identify where the constraint is, and try to address that constraint, not before or after it. I read this really nice book that I got recommended. It's called as Project Phoenix. That is something that made me more that made me, embrace agility even more. So that's something that I wish you all would also like to see, and see what kind of processes that you can unlearn. And if there's something that I would want you all to remember from this session, I would say just go and grab that spotlight. As a first writer, the mind shift also changes, because previously you might have just been a writer, whereas in a new role, you will also be the owner. So don't be afraid of all the visibility and spotlight that you will get. And don't expect your stakeholders to know what information is required or necessary for you. There's a chance that because you're the first writer, not many stakeholders might have worked with a writer before, or they wouldn't know at what point they should loop you in. You go be your star, go talk to them, and then get yourself invited, take your seat. And working with the non-traditional tech stack can sometimes be very, very frustrating, but this also posed a different kind of challenge for me. I tried not to limit my skills by just the tool set, and I started thinking along the systems and thinking more about the bigger picture, and try to see how systems work together. And instead, I think maybe like, yeah, tomorrow, any bunch of tools that you give me, I think I'll come up with a solution and find workarounds to work with it. Also, sometimes we get very, very protective about our deliverables. This could also, I'm not saying don't take ownership or accountability for your deliverables, you totally should, but enable your stakeholders as much as possible, because when you share all that information and when you're building it the right way, you are definitely going to benefit a lot more, and you are going to start looking at much more complex strategies and much more complex conversations, rather than spending your time on micro decisions.
Thank you, Saujanya. And that's a wrap for today's session. Thanks a lot to you for walking us through the topic today. I hope the insights shared today gave everyone a clearer understanding of how product documentation is built, scaled, and sustained, even with limited tools and resources. To everyone who tuned in, thank you for taking the time to be here and for all your great questions and comments. And of course, if you have more questions or wanted to learn more about Document 360, then feel free to reach out to us. Until then, we'll be back soon with another session. See you next time.